And for some perspective now on this season's algae problem is Tim Davis. You just saw him in the video there. He's an ecologist with NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Okay, Tim, thanks so much for joining us as we kind of take a look back at where we've been now that algal bloom season is officially over. Kind of put in perspective for us where we were this year with the outbreak on Lake Erie.
Okay, well, that's a really good question to ask, because the issue this year was that the bloom was not any bigger than what we've seen.
It wasn't unusual,
years.
right?
No,
there had been larger.
Absolutely. The 2011 bloom was much larger than the bloom this year. The bloom that we saw this year, as forecasted, was a little smaller than the bloom that we saw in 2013 in Lake Erie, but our final numbers are still being worked up. Our field season just ended last week, so this bloom has extended out almost into November. So we've been busy up even before the Toledo water crisis through the end of October sampling this bloom. So we're seeing the bloom stick around longer and longer, but in terms of overall size and toxicity, it really wasn't that toxic or as big as we've seen it in the past.
But the main problem is that it affected people's water supply, and that microcystin was in the water supply, and so it had to shut down, and so no one had water in the Toledo area and parts of Michigan for about 3 days. When we look back at that now, was it really the water treatment that we should have been looking at?
Yes, I mean, we don't want to point fingers. That's not what our role is, but essentially, yes, treatment plants have ways of dealing with microcystin in the water, and that's something that we're trying to really educate people about, is that these treatment plants know how to deal with microcystin when it comes in the raw water. The issue this year in Toledo was that the bloom occurred a little earlier, and we had a north wind, which is very unusual for Lake Erie. So when we have a north wind, it pushes all that biomass down to the southern end of the lake, and that's where the Toledo water intake is. So you had it congregate around the intake, and that might have caught people by surprise, so therefore they might not have been prepared for the amount of microcystin coming into their water treatment plant. Right. Therefore some of it slipped through.
All right, so the main goal here would be to reduce the size of algal blooms on Lake Erie. What is NOAA doing, and what are you doing right now to look at, okay, where do we go here now in the next few months when we go into another season next summer?
That's a really great question. So NOAA takes a multi-pronged approach when it comes to dealing with these algal blooms. First, we have a forecasting. We try to forecast the blooms, try to understand how large they are. We also try to model. So we know where they are. We take we use satellite images to understand where the bloom is, and then we try to model where it might be in 2 or 3 days' time, so that we can let people know if a bloom is coming their way, therefore they can increase their treatment. We also have on-lake sampling. So we sample 6 sites around the Western Basin and Lake Erie every week, and we sample for microcystins. We sample for all the regular water quality parameters. We're also using GLRI, or Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, supplemental funding. We are increasing our ability to monitor these blooms using what we call an environmental sample processor, which is essentially a lab in a can. We stick it out in Lake Erie, and it will take a toxin sample every day for up to 3 months, depending on what we set it at, and it will remotely send data back to our lab, which then we can upload onto GLRL's website. So again, we try to forecast, we try to predict not just where they are going horizontally, but we know these blooms move vertically through the water column.
Right.
So where might they be vertically in the water column as well as horizontally in the basin? We try to go out there and sample these blooms to see whether our models and our forecasting is accurate, and then we try to use more advanced technologies such as these ESPs, or environmental sample processors, to really give us a more fine-scale view of microcystins, how they change in the bloom throughout the course of a day and the course of a week, because right now we only sample once a week. This technology will give us the ability to sample every day.
All right, and we know that you have a lot of work ahead of you, and we know a new study out saying that Lake Erie is very susceptible to algal blooms, and we know the work will continue, and we look forward to checking in with you as the months go on. Thanks, Tim. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.